I have a co-PI on another grant. And so I would love to expand that program to include your graduate students as well. It's a series of webinars that we run every year. And so really what this, this talk is about, how do I go backwards? Does anyone know how to go backwards? Oh, good. Okay. I had listed this, lessons learned from launching sustainable NRT projects. So I've been funded as a researcher by NSF, often, usually through SCIES, Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering, because much of my research has a computational bent. And I've been funded by them for about 30 years. And I'm very familiar with what it's like to write a research grant. And probably some of you who have come up through your regular faculty positions may be familiar with getting funding for your own research. That's a very different kind of activity than getting a training grant funded, as I learned when we finally succeeded on getting our NRT funded. And to say that we're talking about lessons learned from sustainable projects is a little aspirational at this point because our project is in its second year of funding, but we're only in our first year of training students because NRT, very wisely, I now know, although I didn't understand this before, once you get your NRT funding for the $2 million or $3 million grant that you may be pursuing, they have a ramp up period where you can get all the pieces in place. And it turns out that's really, really useful and important. And I thank them for thinking of that because it's not something that PIs would have thought of. So when you get your research grant, you're ready to go right away. So, but what this grant, this talk is really about is what I wish we had known before we even started preparing our proposal. So, you know, what's really interesting is when you can learn from what you've done in the past, you can learn from your mistakes. I also really believe in learning from other people's mistakes. So I'm very happy to share my mistakes with you and we can talk about other NRTs from my institution. Stonybrook has 2 other prior NRTs. And at the time we were preparing our proposal, one of them was ramping down, and I'll talk a little bit more about that one later, and it's very sustainable, which is awesome, but they made some mistakes, which I learned from, and the other one was just ramping up, and so we don't overlap with that one so much, but I do meet with that PI from time to time to have lunch and see how things are going. And we also had previously an IGE that I helped write the very first proposal for, but then of course, I think nothing gets funded on the first round, but I think Daniel didn't say that, but actually then I thought of one counterexample. So my colleague from NSF, who, you know, we all returned to our institutions after we rotated NSF for a few years. If anyone wants to talk about what it's like to be a rotator, I'd love to talk to you. It's the perfect thing to do to avoid burnout when you've been a faculty member for 25 or 30 years. You know, it's a wonderful thing to do, to experience giving away money from the other side of the table. And what could be more fun than that, you know, and you learn a lot about the different perspectives about grant writing. And so, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit tomorrow, I think around 11 o'clock, I'm not sure what time, but Giselle and I are going to be talking about how to win a proposal, how strategies for writing the grant proposal. And I think of funding agencies as they have a problem and you can be the solution to their problem. They want to fund good work that perpetuates their mission. And you want to fund your grad students in the case of an NRT. And so if you see this as this really synergistic relationship and you can take their perspective and try to solve their problem by presenting something that fits their criteria, then they can also give you what you need. And that is a very synergistic way to look at grant writing. And so, you know, doing this for a research grant is a little bit different than doing it for a traineeship. So I think I'll just show you what we've learned at this point, okay? Anything else I want to say? No, I think later we'll get to that. So I'm going to start by trying to get rid of this darn thing again. You probably can see the floating meeting controls, okay? So I wanted to start with a timeline of what happened. Nope.
Push escape.
Push escape. Oh, where is escape? Okay. Nope. Okay, okay, so I know that this is a problem with everybody's, so I'll just keep doing it when I'm here. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is, actually, no, let me just finish what I was saying before. I think UT Corpus Christi might have gotten their $2 million NRT on the first round. but I'm not sure. Anyway, but most everybody else, it takes many rounds. Took us 2, and I will tell you about that. So basically, all right, I'm giving up on this control thing. Basically, we submitted our first proposal in 2019. Now, at the very end of 2018, and that's really not early enough, let me tell you, we were only about a month or 2 before the deadline, the grad director of computer science called me up and said, hey, this is C.R. Ramakrishnan, wouldn't you like to be a co-PI on our NRT proposal? And I said, what's it about? And he said, well, we want to provide a bridge between computational data science and computer science and the social sciences. And we want to basically bridge the training between those 2 kinds of groups, because we have women in the social sciences and we don't in computer science. And so I said, sure, that sounds wonderful, but when's the deadline? And then I was horrified to realize it was February 6th. So we worked together, and what CR had come up with at that point was a really, I thought, really exciting training proposal in terms of creating bridge courses that could train one of my very smart PhD students who's already a data scientist, who just wouldn't construe herself that way, but very familiar with many statistical techniques. And so if you can give a student like that the ability to use AI and understand basically what the limitations might be, what the uses might be, that would be great. And then you could take students from computer science and have them understand what where data come from, because computer scientists are used to being handed well-defined problems. They love well-defined problems. They hate ill-defined problems. And I know this from my time in computer science. But psychologists and other social scientists are used to messy human data, and they know where data come from. They know what the limitations of data are. They know when a data set just isn't appropriate for a particular use. If you're just scraping data off the web and using it like a computer science, you don't know that. So we thought we want to create this bridge where, each group of students, we think of them as the DS and data science and the HDS and the human-centered science, and we'll allow them to cross this bridge and do convergent research together. What could be more fun than that? So with these bridge courses that CR had invented in computer science, they were going to be very sustainable, because he was also going to offer the same courses to returning professionals who wanted to up their game and be ready to use AI in whatever field they're in. That seemed like a great idea. So that's what we started with. So we added on a bunch of wonderful disciplines that are still with us, and we're adding 2 more on at this point, but at the time we had our basic 9 or 8 or 9 disciplines, which included applied math and statistics. One of our third co-PIs was Wei Zhu, who came on to the project at the early stage when we were writing it. She's mentored more female PhDs in applied math than anyone I know. And so we're kind of the ringleaders for this project. We have other faculty PIs from linguistics and another one from psychology, Benita London, who studies STEM identity. So she studies things like belongingness and participation of gender minorities and women in the natural sciences, and also participation of racial and ethnic underrepresented folks in other disciplines. And so she's one of our co-PIs. And then we have other PIs or co-PIs and other kind of orbiting faculty that are involved with the project, from linguistics, economics, sociology, neurobiology and behavior, political science, and Africana studies. Okay. Now, Africana studies isn't a STEM field, but we found our collaborator there who has degrees in psychology and political science. So we have a lot of NSF identifiable fields, even in the non-STEM area there. And so in 2019, our proposal was declined, okay? We're all used to getting declinations. I still, when I get reviews for anything, I can't even look at them right away. I used to have a colleague read them out loud to me, because you're shaking, you're not sure what you're looking for, that word that says yes or no. You know what it's like, right? So we were declined. We got, some middling and a couple of enthusiastic points, but they were pretty critical. Clearly, our proposal had some fatal flaws. And it was not even, you can't see it because this talking thing, we were not even discussed. Now that just feels awful. We're not even discussed. We worked so hard. Well, we didn't work that hard. We only had 2 months, but we weren't even discussed. And so, my computer science colleague put it away in a drawer, and I read the reviews. I thought, well, this isn't so bad, but whatever. Things are never as bad as you think. And so we decided we would try again. And so in the 2020 competition, we ended up sitting that one out because we were a little bit late in applying to the internal competition. I'm glad Daniel already introduced that concept. Stonybrook almost always has more than 2 that want to submit. And so I serve on the internal committee now, and I'm not creating another thing that would be competing with myself. And we usually have about 4 of our university units putting forth an NRT, and we picked 2 of them. And so far we haven't gotten any funded since I've gotten ours, but I have assisted with some of those as well. And so we missed the internal competition deadline, which I think has to be the greatest thing that ever happened to us. I didn't know it at the time. I would have loved to have gotten funding on the first round, but I don't think anyone ever does it. So one point I really want to make is really you need to persist, and you need to look at this as a collaborative, very mentorly activity that NSF and NRT will engage you with and help you make your project better, either by turning you down when you have a fatal flaw and you deserve it, or by working with you later on, and I'll talk about that in a minute. With our problem, we had several problems. Our training program, while it was, I think, really good, it was too complicated. We had too many tracks. We were trying to address too many different constituencies. It was probably hard to understand. This sprawling proposal wasn't something you could kind of write on the back of a business card, okay? Hard to understand. And we didn't have a theme, okay? When we came up with a research theme, and this speaks to Daniel's point about how important integration of research and training has to be. We basically looked around and said, here's 9 people doing really interesting research. What's going on in your lab? Let's write a paragraph about each project and we'll stick all this together. But that was our only theme. That was no theme at all, I learned, okay? So if we hadn't sat it out, we probably would have gone to the trouble of writing another bad proposal and not getting funded. So I'm really happy that we did. So what happened was CR and Wei and I started having lunch together, hanging out together. We're all very involved, and Wei is in undergrad education a lot, and CR and I are in grad education. And one day we were getting ready for the next internal competition, and it just hit me. I've been reading, it was during the pandemic, right? And we were all very concerned with the inequalities among our grad students, how they were impacted differently by the pandemic, depending on whether they had to work part-time at a grocery store during the pandemic, whether their relatives were sick or dying. I mean, Stonybrook is a really, it's one of the SUNY State University of New York flagships, along with Buffalo, and we're an extremely diverse group of students, especially economically. Many first-generation college students, hardworking students. Most students have to work to put themselves through school. We have the children of immigrants. We have immigrants. We have everybody. We have a pretty good diversity in terms of racial and ethnic and gender and other kinds of diversity, and even a lot of age diversity. I appreciated your comment about that. I think it's a really good place to write one of these 4, right? It just hit us all of a sudden that the one theme that we could think of that would pull all of these different human-centered sciences and data sciences together is the theme of bias. We were reading things like Candy's, How to Be an Anti-Racist. We were reading Kathy O'Neill's popular book, Weapons of Map Destruction. We were reading about the ProPublica study on incarceration and that kind of thing, and how AI had been misused to produce the same error rates in Black and white inmates about whether they should be released on parole. However, all of the errors in the Black inmates were in the against the inmate's favor, but all of the ones for the white inmates were for the inmate getting released. So, if you look just at error rates across demographics with AI results, you get things that superficially look equal when they're absolutely not. And so we were inspired by all of those things. And it turned out that virtually every single one of us had a student who was passionately interested in that and wanted to apply their research to something meaningful. So we picked the theme of detecting and addressing bias in data, humans, and institutions. One of my colleagues in computer science wanted to add eliminating bias, but you know what, as a psychologist, you know that everyone has biases. We're evolved to have biases. If we didn't have biases, we wouldn't still be here. So in a sense, you can't eliminate them, you can manage them. Okay, so that's why we picked detecting and addressing bias in data, in humans, and in institutions. Okay, so that was our theme. And with that new theme, we were selected as one of the two for that internal competition. And we submitted our second proposal February 25th in 2021. Okay. And so just before Memorial Day weekend, the timing could have been better, we got some very surprising news from NSF. We were told that ours was one of the set of proposals under consideration. Now, my experience as a research grant writer was never that NSF was very mentorly. You just get your reviews and it's either thumbs up or thumbs down. And so I'm just used to this harsh kind of situation. When I went to NSF, I helped manage the career program. I was on the career working group, and the career grant is for new junior faculty who can be domestic or international to write their usually first research grant, not always. And it's very mentorly. And when I managed career proposals, I would end up finding like really promising one fatal flaw. I would negotiate with the PI in order to fix it because they need mentoring. But everyone needs mentoring, even old people like me or some of us. And so I was very appreciative of the mentorly way the process was handled, and I was very surprised by it. So we got a set of 6, really 7 questions. One had 2 parts, and we were given 1 week to respond to it. And I had no idea how high the bar was at this point, but I managed to get all of our 10 co-PIs, or the listed personnel that Daniel referred to. We had another 10 or 15 listed with an asterisk underneath, but we did not put them in the table, so we turned it out. Yay! I had no idea how close that could come. But anyway, I managed to get everybody to respond. They dropped their Memorial Day plans. We had several Zoom calls, and we ended up making a significant structural change to our training curriculum. And one of the issues was, I told you about this bridge metaphor, right? Bridging data science and human-centered science. Well, we had paid much more attention at getting the human-centered scientists over the bridge to be able to use AI. We paid a lot less attention to getting the data scientists over the bridge to learn where data come from and how the impacts can be not what you intended. I'm so tired of hearing Silicon Valley executives saying, that's not my job. I don't worry about the fact that automatic driving cars kill people. That's not my job. No, okay, we're not training that kind of person. We're training people who are looking at the impacts of everything they do altogether. And so to do that, you need to embody those different perspectives, and Pete told you about just a minute. Okay, but we turned in those questions. If anyone wants to see them, I'm happy to show them to you. I hope that's okay. That's not, I didn't sign any confidentiality thing about that. But I did refer very closely that our project was packaged in such a way that we would be addressing what NSF wanted in their mission. Okay, all right, whoops, that's not what I expected. Okay, here we go. Okay, and so in July, which was a very short time, we received the good news that our project would be funded. Well, that caused a mad dash. I don't know if those of you with research grant fundings know what this is about. When NSF decides it wants to fund you, you have to get your human subjects approvals done immediately, or else your project will be delayed, or you have to get some kind of letter saying it's in the mail, basically. And you have to turn in your overdue or due project reports. So given that somebody asked this question, and I remember shaking my head at Daniel, and he answered the way I would have answered, which is good. Do you want your graduate dean to be the PI? Absolutely not, in my view. Because, all right, we'll get to who should be the PI in just a minute. But the grad dean has a lot of knowledge, but they're too busy. And it's such a stiff drink. It's such a drinking out of a fire hose to be the PI and even a co-PI on all these projects. And so you have to love the theme, or else you're not going to be willing to distribute your time that way. And the PI has to be someone who's really enthusiastic and willing to drop everything else, put other things aside, because students need things when they need things, and that's the way it goes. So, so in that case, you know, again, it was amazing that these people were so committed, but that made me happy because I realized that I wouldn't be taking on more than I could deliver, because the team that we had put together and managed to deepen our collaborative relationships with over that extra time was so very good, right? And we were people who liked each other and liked working together and that kind of thing. I'll talk about that in just a minute a little bit more. And so we had to get everyone's progress report in, and one of our people on one of our PIs, Benita London, she's so good at grant writing. She's a social psychologist who studies STEM identity, basically a growth mindset, belongingness. She comes from Columbia. And so that is her science in psychology. And so she's on every single research grant in the university and is also evaluating some of them. Poor Benita, I try not to bring her, but she had 3 progress reports that were overdue. And not only that, but the PIs on those were the president, the provost, and her. Okay, so I spent like this nerve-wracking 2-week period where I thought that NRT would just say, sorry, your progress reports aren't in. That can happen on a research grant, and it probably should, because PIs can be terrible about paperwork. But I was terrified that we would not be admitted in the competitive part, you know, when we were asked those questions. And so I literally said, I will do anything for you. I will clean your office if you get this done. It was insane, but we managed to get them done. They came in a little bit later than that good news, but I do remember writing to NRT saying, we're really trying, they should be done next week, please do. And so anyway, so these are things to take into account. So definitely involve your university officers, because I'm going to talk about sustainability in just a bit. That's really one way to make it sustainable, but do not expect them to lead the project. Do not make them a PI or a co-PI. You are supposed to make your evaluator one of the 10 personnel, or at least that was the previous rule. I haven't seen a recent solicitation. So you want to involve them up front as well. I'll talk about evaluators in just a minute. So there were nothing but surprises in this project. So your grant proposal represents what you think is going to happen, but it turns out you have to be flexible. And as Daniel mentioned, certain things should get sunsetted, the things that don't work. The things that do work, you need to make sustainable. So I may mention as we go along what we were surprised by, what isn't working, and what we think will work. Again, we're only halfway through the first year of having trainees in our second year right now. So we've learned a lot already. And so the first surprise was the project start date was a month earlier than we were told by the solicitation. So that was really scrambling. I do appreciate that though, because that's closer to being aligned with the academic calendar. Starting funding in October is horrendous, because then you can't fund, you know, you can't fund people on the yearly turnover that we need as academics, okay? So we immediately started the bureaucratic process of searching for a coordinator, okay? I just knew that this was a huge fight. You know, I knew I could not do this and coordinate it myself, and my PIs were as busy as I was, if not busier in the case of Benita. So we started immediately looking for a coordinator. We started that process on September 10th. We posted our ad. And of course, that was well before the very, very helpful NRT orientation that we had the next month, where we learned what a coordinator should be doing and what the job should look like. But we did a pretty darn good job. And I somehow knew not to skimp on the coordinator. And I heard later from people I met at the orientation, and also people at our first year PIs meeting, which happens every year and is glorious, and you have to go because you'll meet so many interesting people. I attended by Zoom, but we sent our coordinator in person. And so we learned from people that, you know, you really shouldn't skimp on the coordinator. Unfortunately, we did that. We got 50 applications because we decided we weren't going to skimp, and we posted up a little bit higher than the amount of the range of salary. And we hired someone who is absolutely wonderful, and I'll talk about her in just a minute. But it took a while. It took basically until December to get her on board, because with HR, you have to do all of this stuff. You have to look at all 50 and how many qualifications they have. You have to review everyone who has the same number of qualifications because of equity and things like that. And so that process is in place, and you can't jump around it. You may be in a different position if you have someone locally who you know is going to be your coordinator. We can talk about the pros and cons in just a minute. And so there might be something on the bottom of this that got cut off, but anyway. So again, this is the virtual project meeting that I mentioned. And then the one that's cut off says something like, in August of 2022, we admitted our first class of 11 trainees. And now these 11 trainees, I'll show you what the the disciplines look like in a minute, but 3 of them are international students that are not eligible for NRT funding. All the others are eligible for NRT funding. And what we didn't think about when we wrote even the timeline and the curriculum, I think we might have mentioned that we were vague about it maybe. One thing to think about is, are you going to fund people in their very first year of grad school and try to attract them to your program because of the funding and the theme? Or one very important thing is that we want our trainees to succeed in their home discipline PhDs, and we don't want the NRT theme and the being pulled in different directions with the convergent research to negatively impact their progress toward their PhDs. And that's super important. NSF does not want to increase time to degree. That's a way in which many of our programs are measured in terms of our quality. And so we did not really know what to do about that. So we're currently recruiting from within Stonybrook PhD program. Stonybrook is, even though we're a poor state university, always in a budget crisis. We fund all of our PhD students, essentially, virtually all of them. And so it wasn't a problem for us to guarantee that our students would continue to have funding after the grant had turned. And that's one thing you have to arrange somehow, okay? So that's an issue. And so we have students we have one student among the 11 who came here because of this project, because he's my student and I told him about it even before we were funded, so that we recruited him. That's going to happen for our second cohort next year as well. We're recruiting those now. We have one student who is he's finishing his dissertation. He'll graduate this spring, but he wanted to join. He's international just to get going on a side project on bias and equity, because he's a political scientist, very interested in that. And then we have students in between in their second year, a few in their second year, not yet funded, several in their third year who are funded, and a fourth year student, Rosa Bermejo, who's one of Bonita's students, who is actually working on equity and STEM identity. That's what her dissertation is about. And so she's going to stay one extra year just in order to do an internship, okay? She wants to work in industry or maybe in the government. So she's got a government internship coming up this summer. She's applied to several. One is Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is awesome. And the other one we're hoping will be an internship with one of our convergent research areas that has bubbled up in this past semester. We're working with the Innocence Project in New York City, which gets innocent people out of jail and gets them exonerated. And so I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Okay, that's one of the things that was kind of created by students and faculty after we wrote the proposal. That's not in the proposal, okay. All right, so let's see, where am I? I think the rest of this talk will be about my advice on getting ready to write your NRT proposal. And again, tomorrow, Giselle and I are going to talk more about grant writing and what's required for the proposals and the strategies you can use to try to get the money. I'm all about getting money, but it's much better if you can kind of use the time that it takes. And if you look at that previous slide, I'll make my slides available if anyone wants to look at them. I know that text was too small. It took us 2.5, almost 3 years to get funding, and we were successful on the second try. Okay. We sat out 1 year. We would have had 3 tries that we, to get it if we had tried to propose then. The other proposals that I will show you later of successful ones within Stonybrook basically took up to, I know that the one that was winding down that's very sustainable now, the NRT, is at our Institute for Advanced Computational Science, and it took him 4 tries to get funded. I started looking at his applications even before we submitted one, and I learned from his mistakes. And even our IGE project took more than one to get funded. So again, I know this. So I'm going to go through each of these really quickly with some examples. So think of it as the journey, and every step of it can be useful if you don't just throw your reviews in a drawer and get depressed and not revisit them. It's really worth persisting. And again, it's worth calling up the NRT team and trying to find out, what are the fatal flaws, what are the strategic things I can do. And even if they didn't discuss your precious proposal like ours wasn't discussed, they can often interpret and help you read between the lines. And I do this a lot for students and for junior faculty when I help them write career awards. So you want to learn from your reviews. Not everything they suggest needs to be done, but you know, that's something you can call the program officer up about too. Do I need to satisfy all the reviewers or not? Often you'll get reviews that say the opposite thing about your proposal, and it's hard to figure out what to do. And so learning from each other's successes and mistakes, I think, is really, really important. Because why make the same mistake again twice, right? So even before we submitted, before we submitted the first proposal, I was reading the other NRT's proposals, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. But before we submitted our successful one, I went to see Robert Harrison from IACS, and I said, well, so what do you know now that you wish you had known then when you got your money? What do you wish you had done differently? And he was like, oh, are you ready? Okay, he had very specific things for me. One of them was make sure your trainees understand that they're expected to be, as someone just said, trainees for life. Well, that's not really true. Trainees for the whole duration of their graduate program. He ended up getting students on his proposal, which was, his project was called STRIDE, Science, Technology, Research for Informing Decisions. Okay, so it was a decision-making, public policy and communication, and it involved a constrained set of STEM fields, engineering and natural science fields. It's since expanded to include others. But so he said, I wish I had decided early on to make sure all the trainees understood that they have to persist through the whole program, you know, the whole time that they're in their graduate program getting their degree. So that means you really have to structure it differently to engage people who are at all different stages of getting their degree. Now, again, I'm going to refer a lot to PhDs because when we simplified our training program, which was a mess in the first submission, we ended up getting rid of the whole master's component and all these other components and just focusing in on research and PhD training. Okay. And so, so I learned right away that when we do outreach, when we try to recruit people from across Stonybrook or from incoming graduate students, we make it clear that you are signing up for this.
And I want to know how he did it.
And we don't necessarily expect you to do your dissertation.
Hey, how can I help you? Hey, I saw you paid for.
We don't necessarily expect people to do their dissertation on detecting and addressing bias, but some of them are. And what people want to do is pick up a side project in a publication, because many of them are going into career paths that do value, you know, communicating science research. Okay, so now they all know that they're in it for the duration, and that's really, really important. The other thing Daniel told me was something that maybe this is why we started looking for our coordinator right away. I think it was, he said, it's really important to hire the right coordinator. And so what we did was we took his coordinator, who was winding down her project, we put her on our search committee to find our coordinator. And that was probably one of the smartest things we did early that we just lucked out thinking of doing, right? And so that was really useful. The other nice thing that Robert had was he had a whole building under his control, because he's one of those people who is tied to the Simons Foundation, and so money falls out of the sky and lands in his lap from anonymous donors all the time. And I once said to him, are you sure this isn't coming from Jeffrey Epstein? He said, no. So they wish to remain anonymous, but it's not Epstein. I came from the MIT Media Lab where that was not the case. Oh my God. Anyway, so I'm very concerned about the taint of money sometimes. Anyway, so you want to learn from everybody else's successes and mistakes. If you want to look at the proposals that I'm familiar with, these are our proposals. This is ours right here. Okay, and Giselle is going to tell you tonight at dinner how to use NSF Award Search, and this is, I just picked these up from that. This is the one that's still going on. Sarita Bhatia is running it. It's material science and chemistry. We don't overlap much. So I'm not as familiar with this one. This is the one whose mistakes I learned from, and was that ever useful? And the fact that he has this Institute for Advanced Computational Science means that his is sustainable, and now that the money is over, he's funding them from other sources, which is wonderful. He can also fund international students. So I am really looking to maybe some kind of merger down the road. Once our project has been around for 5 years, can we institutionalize bringing in all these other human-centered areas into the STRIDE domain? He's already brought psychology in there. So our students who are going to be getting graduate certificates for our program they're not ready yet. It takes time to push something like that through an academic kind of a bog like the SUNY system. It can take at least a year to get a certificate approved. So what do our students do in the meantime? So the first group of trainees is signing up for an overlapping certificate that has flexibility so that they're not left out in the cold by the fact that they started in the first cohort. Okay. So next thing, after plan to persist, you want to design a really innovative curriculum for your trainees. And I stuck what I think of as NRT's mission here. This little statement appears at the bottom of every public-facing abstract, and NSF adds this onto your abstract. The NRT is designed to encourage development and implementation of bold, new, potentially transformative models for STEM graduate education training, okay? And then you also need a compelling and convergent theme. Again, we had this, but it was too messy and complex the first time. We didn't have that the first time. Then the second time we had the theme and we fixed this one up, and that's what our reviews did for us, okay? And so I want to spend a little bit of time on this one. And so this is the poster that our incredibly talented coordinator created from materials I gave her, and she even rewrote some of it, showing our project off to the other program coordinators and PIs who are at the NSF NRT annual meeting recently, okay? And so first of all, this picture is from our press release. Here you can see some of us, these are people who love working together. We have lunch regularly at little groups. And so we've got neurobiology and behavior, me, we have Wei Zhu from Applied Math and Statistics, one of our 3 executive committee members. We have Jeff Hines from linguistics, and we have Adrienne Wallace from Africana Studies, trained in political science and psychology. I'm working with her, mentoring her on a career award that she's preparing. Benita London, our extremely busy but very central to the project Associate Dean right now from psychology, C.R. Ramakrishnan, who got the whole thing started. He was the listed PI on our first submission. He forced me to take over as PI for the second one because I was more connected to the theme at that point. Now he's just as connected, but I am the PI currently. And then we have people from, well, he's linguistics and computer science, Owen Rambo with significant industry experience. So that really helps us with the internship component. And then we have Ruben Klein from political science, excuse me. And so what's interesting about all of this is that the discussion on diversity was really interesting because diversity is different depending on the context that you're talking about, right? So CR was originally interested in getting women into computer science. I'm interested in getting AI tools for my students, right? Owen is interested in computational social science. Benita is interested in spreading the word for identity, STEM identity research. We each have a different handle on this elephant of ours, and none of us is serving the other. We're all getting our own agendas in there in a convergent way to have the students help train each other and create these research practicum projects. So a real jewel in what we've been doing so far is this research practicum that we run every semester through the whole part of the grant. I'm leading it right now. We had a fall semester where we were doing the common ground that we all needed, where we had lots of case studies about, bias in word embeddings, why, man is to doctor as women is to nurse. That's what the internet will tell you. And, things like that are surrounding us and we have to resist them. We're interested, Adrienne did a presentation on her work in Africa, which includes both quantitative and qualitative research, as well as document research in history. And so she's got very different kinds of data than some of the others. Each of us brings something really unique to the project. Now, this bridge metaphor that I mentioned, this was there in the first project as well. This kind of just lists what we have going on here. Basically, we are planning 34 funded trainees. Our reviews from the second project, when we were in this dialogue with NRT, persuaded us to add more, but now I understand that we could have had less. Whatever, okay. You should know that NSF, NRT wants almost all the money to go directly to trainees. So it's called participant support. Once you put it in there in the grant project, you can't take it out. So be very careful in the budgeting. Make sure you have enough resources in there to keep a diverse team like this together. There has to be some advantage in there for everyone. No one can be in service to everybody else. We all have to have a common benefit from this, or they have to make it to the press release shot. These are some of the most enthusiastic people, but we have just as many who aren't there. And this is our first group of trainees. This is just over half of them. And here Rosa Bermejo is talking about aggressions basically, and how that impacts someone in their STEM career. Okay, so you can, I'll share all this with you so you can take a look at this. But the other thing I just wanted to point out was that after we spent the whole first semester getting common ground among the trainees, they started to form little groups of interesting projects. So the projects that are bubbling up are not even all listed here. One of our trainees is a clinical psychologist who's working with a data scientist who's not depicted here in bias in AI tools for face recognition and motion recognition in clinical psychological diagnoses that don't work so well on people with dark skin. Okay, that's a real issue. That came up at NRT and Media Lab as well. Some of that work was done there. And so we have a political scientist interested in kind of political biases and AI. We have a social psychologist here interested in a bias project. That's one of my students who's interested in everything, unfortunately. And so some of our projects, probably the one I'm most excited about, I've met already with the Innocence Project, and we're doing a project with trying to provide them with some kind of AI tool to help them with exonerating people from prison. They get hundreds and hundreds of letters every year from poor people who have been stuck for decades sometimes about their innocence, either because of a false confession or eyewitness testimony that was terrible. That's part of my field. I know how bad memory is. And so they work with people, and altogether in this country, since this effort has begun, there are about over 3,000 people who have been exonerated. And the stories are horrifying, they're so sad. And so we're trying to get the rest of the data from that Michigan database so we can do machine learning on the features of these people who come in from all over the place. And the Innocence Project, tiny set of people, have to look through them all and figure out who can we help. So we're going to try to apply machine learning to that to see if we can help identify even biases in selecting who to help and predict their chances of success. And so we're starting that by having kind of a task analysis, which is from one of my fields, which is human-computer interaction, because you don't want to design technology for a problem no one has. That's the way computer science proceeds a lot of the time. That's why we have a bridge. And so we want to really understand their workflow and what they have to do and what decisions they're making to take on a particular client that they're trying to help. And so once we understand that, I'm bringing all the computer science folks and the applied math folks to that one so that they get to see real people, okay? And so we're looking at all other kinds of things as well, and I won't go into these. I want to kind of speed up a little here. You talked about the differences in different fields. Both of our project proposals had this graph in them. So what we did was we took all of our initial disciplines. This doesn't have two. We have a new data science PhD program that just got approved, so that's in our group now. And Africana Studies is in our group now, but they don't yet have a PhD program, so I don't have the same data on them. They're trying to ramp one up, and we're trying to help them. But you have all of our fields: applied math, computer science, economics, linguistics, neurobiology and behavior, political science, psychology, and sociology. So what I did here was I displayed the diversity of each department in terms of the right-hand bar is their PhD students, and the left-hand bar is their master's, oh no, their undergrads, right? Yeah, bachelor's, right? And so basically the gray bar shows the proportion of international students. So you know that computer science and engineering are starved for domestic students, as is economics, interestingly enough, okay? Whereas in these other fields, we have, in many of them, like linguistics, undergrad, and psychology in both undergrad and grad, we have more domestic students than international ones. You can see the internationals here and the domestics here. The blue, dark and light, are the binary choice. Again, you could have updated this, but It's harder to display. And so you can see that here's the problem, and this goes back to my life philosophy. You will succeed in life if you make your problem, your desire the solution to someone else's problem, while their solution is the solution to your problem. So basically, it's a mutual complementary process. So by including these people, we know where the female members in STEM, who are already data scientists, they just don't label themselves as such, they certainly could be in the classes that are taught by these departments, right? And so that's one of the original motivations. So Daniel talked about the data tables you have to make. Don't put that off to the last minute because they have to make sense and be understandable and complete. And so I can show anyone who wants to what the data table looks like from our grant. But I included this too because it's prettier to look at a graph than a data table. Okay. All right, assemble the right team, super important. I've given you some hints about that already. You need a plan to keep them engaged. There has to be something in it for everybody. And you have to plan for these important roles. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit more about that. So this is a little bit, my coordinator said, oh, you're giving this talk. How about if I make a slide for you showing all of our connections? And I said, oh my gosh, I fell into my lap from the sky, thank you. And so she's really good at this. And so she made this is our topic right here. And on the big blue circles are our departments right now. I don't have the data science one up there because it just got approved and announced about 3 months ago, but it's not kind of embedded yet. The red dots are our PIs for the project. And so we've got one in linguistics, we've got Bonita is here, I'm here because I'm in computer science, linguistics, and psychology. We have another computer scientist here. We have, this is CR, whose idea this whole thing was in the beginning, and this is way over here. And so you can see these lighter gray blue dots are the other really active faculty, and then we have probably about 10 more that kind of orbit around us and come and go. The best way to get someone involved in your project and keep them there is to fund one of their students from their lab as your trainee. So I'll just say that all 11 of our trainees are from the most connected dots, which you probably are not surprised to hear. We don't have any in sociology or in economics, which has almost no domestic students, but we're going to be trying to recruit some of their international students. We don't have any yet in Africana studies because they don't have a PhD program, but we're trying to let them have some of their students participate in ours. So we're going to try to help that. And then neurobio doesn't have anyone yet either. Okay, but that's what it looks like, okay? So again, recruit the right coordinator. If you take nothing away from this talk besides persist, take this away. This is super important. When I was at one of these meetings, I learned that there was a PI from a $2 million one of these projects who was acting as his own coordinator, which is just, I don't know how he does it. He didn't seem like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but I would have been. It was just astonishing to learn that. It's a full-time job. Many projects have a half-time coordinator, and that could work if you already have someone embedded in your institutional context who knows the ropes of everything. And sometimes it makes sense to take on too much if you can get more information that way. So I'm graduate director, I'm the PI for this, plus for the Department of Ed, again, training award, which is absolutely different from the NET stuff long I've learned. And I'm also on the grad council, which reviews programs for the university. So this way I have my ear to the ground. I know when things are about to change, so I can propagate that information down to where it impacts our trainees. So even though I hate having too many hats, I love the fact that I'm connected and I know what's going on. So you need to find someone as a coordinator who has really good skills. We can go over that some other time if you want, but they need to really be good at a lot of different things, but they need to understand and love your theme. So Kristen is an applied math and statistics undergrad from Stonybrook, and she also was a minor in women's studies, so she couldn't be more perfect. She has a lot of administrative higher ed experience and tutoring. She ran a Huntington tutoring center and all that. And so what she learned at at the first meeting that she went to was that there's a vibrant NRT coordinators network. Did you know this, Daniel? Yeah. And NSF has nothing to do with setting this up, I think. They don't fund them, but they call each other up every day and say, this is a weird situation that just came up. Has this ever happened to you? And they're wonderful social support because this way she's networked with people all over the country, and we know we have good information. So this is something everybody should be aware of. We've really benefited from that. And then you will find yourself, and this never happens when you're a research PI, you don't have to think about policy. It's your lab you're running. You don't have to think about consistency. You have a small number of students, maybe. Maybe if you have more students, you have to think about fairness and consistency. But with a group like this, with so many different participants, you have to have clear and consistent and fair policies. And so we spend a lot of our time, faculty member, the computer science member, and me, we meet every single Thursday at 2 o'clock, no matter what. So before we even hired the coordinator, we've met every Thursday for 2 years, or a year and a half now. And that we have to do that. Even if we have no agenda, we always find something that is pressing that we're very glad we talked about. And so that's where we do things like policy setting. Is it time to start recruiting the next class? Does the student look like they wouldn't benefit? So we'll turn them down. We turn down some students who apply. We have an application process, a review process, and an admissions committee, and all that kind of stuff, okay? I need to speed up and finish. I should be not the dean, okay? You want to recruit the right evaluator. We struggled over this for a bit. The first time we submitted, we had this, it had to be an outside evaluator that first round. So we found somebody who seemed pretty good. And the problem was he really had no creative ideas whatsoever. He assigned his colleague to help us with a PhD in English. That's no problem for me, but the reviewers hated that. And he just gave us this generic logic model, which I thought was not very helpful. So, he was reasonable in the rates he charged, but we ended up going with a different evaluator the second time around, who turned out to be one of Benina's colleagues from graduate school from Columbia, who does active research in STEM identity in a different university. And she's phenomenal. So she set us up with our measures, which include not only the survey measures that you mentioned, but well-tested instruments like belongingness and growth mindset, and all kinds of racism and bias and other kinds of measures that we know have been tried and true in the literature. And so our evaluator is phenomenal, but she's very expensive. So I understand why NSF no longer requires an external evaluator, but I'm not sure how to get around that. If we had picked the person available as our internal evaluator, who's also great, I have evaluating my Department of Ed grant, but the problem is, she's too overburdened. She can't get into the project. We're not going to get the level of attention that we get from our evaluator. Just about solving your problem, but we want to learn from how you try to solve your problem that we can transfer to other universities. That's what DGE, Department of Graduate Division of Graduate Education, is all about, right? And so that's super important. And the evaluator can help you with that. We need to do formative and summative. That's weird spacing. And NSF decided this past year to institute, they've probably been working on it longer, they're collecting data directly. And I wish they weren't, because that means our trainees have to do it twice. And I think we're collecting essentially the same data that NSF is collecting, but that I'm sure will work itself out over time. We're trying not to burden our trainees with too many surveys. We survey them beginnings and ends of semesters a lot, okay? All right, we're getting to the end. We're getting to sustainability. I'm so sorry I'm running late. Should I just conclude, or shall I just finish with a punchline? Oh yes, I should, right? The thing I really, really wish we'd done differently is to get commitments from our university up front, because they're so eager for you to get your funding that they're much happier to help you do so by providing promises that you should get in writing. NSF doesn't allow matching funds for this program, but you can get your own promises from people. Like, I wish I had negotiated, give us some international student lines that we can use to fund students, supplement, to bring them up to the 34K level, things like that. We wish we had negotiated earlier. So when you have all your time now after you get declined for your first application, spend this time getting the commitments and say, look at this review. You need to help me fix this so we can get our funding. That's the way to get your funding, okay? And so, you want, these are some of the things I wish I had negotiated. A suitable space to serve as a home for your project. Again, we have a space, but it's not anywhere near as glorious as the other space that our sustainable project has. And I can't see what's on the bottom here, but these examples, I have more examples if anyone wants to talk to me offline. So the way to make your project sustainable, you want to leverage it by aligning it with existing resources in your institution. So at Stonybrook, even though we're a poor state university, always having a funding crisis, we have a number of things that are somewhat modular and we can integrate really carefully into our training grant here. So one thing we do is there are some really well-resourced programs like this new data science program. We're going to be having them provide a TA for some of our bridge courses that can address the cohort of human-centered sciences who are trying to learn AI because they don't have quite the math background that computer scientists have, right? So if we had a dedicated teaching assistant, then that would help a lot. So we're trying to leverage things whenever we can here, and that really helps. We have the ALDA Center for Communicating Science to the Public, which I always encourage our grad students to take their courses, and they're wonderful. And I have another grant with the ALDA Center on communicating climate risk. That's a smaller grant, it's an RCN Research Coordination Network grant, but that's been a lot of fun too. So I try to connect myself to our partners in any way I can, whether it's directly through this grant that we're talking about or through other means, because then they will take your phone calls and have lunch with you and want to ask them for something, okay? And so one of the things, the first thing we had our coordinator do was to launch our website, and she keeps that up to date with announcements. So when Adrienne from Africana Studies addressed the UN about the various things in Africa, we put that up on our website. When one of our linguistics faculty won the Chancellor's Award for his research, we put that up on our website. When students win awards or publish papers, we put that up on our website. And so that's one way to get administrators committed to you. You want to make them your advocate, and then you can be more successful at embedding yourself in the infrastructure of your university, okay? And so I just want to end with this, which you can't see, so I'm just going to close this one last time. I hope it stays closed. Darn it. I hate it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I think that having a training grant is so very different from research. You know, after 25 years of doing research, I went to NSF, that was loads of fun. And then I needed something when I came back, and so I wrote a couple of grants. And I think something like this NRT project, which is so very different, is one of the most fun things you can do as a challenge and just as a way to be embedded with people you didn't always see every day from your own department, and thinking about problems in different ways that are convergent, where you really need all this other expertise. It's not all under your control. You have to become some of this expertise. It's a really wonderful experience. And so I think thinking of it as a journey, not I submitted, I got turned down, now I'm going to put it in a drawer and go cry. No, it's just the first step of a journey, and you should look forward to a really rewarding experience if you try to do this. So.